Greetings and welcome to the April chapter meeting of CSINext from all places, Gallup, New Mexico. I'm Daniel Hargreaves, the CSINext chapter treasurer. This is one of the exciting benefits of being a virtual chapter. Anywhere, anytime, we're able to come together. Borders and boundaries don't slow us down. But before we begin the presentation, I'd like to open it up with a brief intro of chapter business. Chapter members, you'll be receiving the ballot for the fiscal year 17 for chapter officers. The voting will be open for 1 week. Please take a moment to vote when you receive your ballot. Next month, May's presentation will be He Said, She Said, Managing Contract Issues by Wayne Sealer. Registration is available for for this meeting. Please visit CSINext.org for more information or to set up your reservation. You're not a CSINext chapter member? We'd like to have you join us. Besides the occasional meeting notification, you'll receive the monthly e-blast with program information, chapter events, and more. Let's jump into the program. Today we have Flex Specs presented by Vivian, Volz, AIA, CSI, SCIP, CCS, Lead AP, BD plus C. If you have any questions, please type them in and we'll answer them along the way. At the end of the presentation, there will be a survey. If you'd like to receive learning units, please fill out the survey. If you need AIA credits, please include your AIA number in that survey. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Vivian Volz is a licensed architect in California with 25 years experience in practice focused on specifications since 2002. In her independent specification practice, VVAS, Vivian provides architectural project specifications for commercial, multifamily, and institutional projects. She serves on CSI's editorial advisory board and the certification strategic group. She's a leader in the San Francisco chapter, and I'd like to turn it over to Vivian.
Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to see friendly faces on the list of people who are attending. Hi, Wade. Hi, Cynthia. Hi, Anne. Thanks for inviting me. This presentation was given first almost exactly a year ago at the CSI Academies, and I have since joined SCIP. So thank you, Daniel, for the introduction and for reminding me that I'm also a SCIP member. Now, if we are specifiers, or if we have learned to read specs and use them in our practice, we are probably most familiar with the design, bid, build project delivery method, and that's the way that most subscription specs and most of CSI's training about specs are assuming that the project will be. So this session is going to explore how specifications morph when we start to use other delivery systems. Division 1 is one of the most important places where they change, and so we'll focus a lot on Division 1. Even design, negotiate, build, which is awfully similar to design, bid, build, changes in Division 1. We're going to talk a lot about how to specify performance, and we're going to look into a couple of sort of sub-methods that people use for performance specs. And then, depending upon how much time we have, we'll spend a little or a lot of time on integrated project delivery and design assist. And this is how we advance. Yes, it is. Go. You've seen the what are these things called? Learning objectives before. But let's focus on on the bottom one, which is about performance requirements. We're going to take a look at what's called the quality loop, where we're making sure that we've got all the right design criteria, substantiation, and then quality assurance and quality control measures. We're going to spend a little time making sure that that loop is intact for each of these delivery systems. And this is the whole presentation all right here. we're going to take a look at design, bid, build, just to get our bearings. Then we'll look at how it changes in design, negotiate, build. And we'll look at the two different kinds of design build specs. And then we'll look into integrated project delivery. And way down here are these extra stuff. So the first question you ask yourself when you are exploring a different delivery system is, whose am I? Whose specifier am I? Whose voice am I? In the case of design, bid, build, we know that we are the owner's voice. In the case of design, negotiate, build, we also are the owner's voice, but it gets sticky later on in the Similarly, we need to know who we're talking to. It's the contractor in design, bid, build, but who is it as we move down the chart? We need to know what it is we're trying to do and what the very next thing after the specs are issued will be. They're related. What's the big goal is to achieve this thing. We're going to talk about the quality loop for each of these types of delivery systems, and then we'll look into what the special language might look like. So design, bid, build is where we start. We just said this. So hiding in here, we'll talk about design assist and delegated design. So design, bid, build and design, negotiate, build are really similar, as we said. The owner is speaking through the architect, the design professional of record, and us, the specifier. And here, let's take a look at this quality loop idea. In the academies, we had a whole session on the quality loop, so I'm going to give it to you quickly because you didn't get that presentation this morning already. We set up a set of requirements, and the contractor proposes solutions in the form of submittals. We review them to substantiate whether or not they comply with the requirements. They get built, and then we test them to make sure in the quality control side that they really do comply. Now, if this is a Windows system, then we know that there are other quality assurance measures like mock-ups that go into this as well. But substantiation can take the form of a field test or a field mock-up or a laboratory mock-up or just the test results that the manufacturer submits. So there's many ways to substantiate the proposal, but they all kind of fit into this one side of quality assurance. Let's see what's next. Oh, you can see it closer. So in our standard spec language for design, bid, build, we are saying things like the successful bidder shall, or if we're using imperative language, then that's implied, and we've said it once somewhere that build this wall is an imperative statement that means that the successful bidder shall build this wall. And then specific to bid processes, you may actually be saying out loud, bidders shall. Usually use the notice of award to start the clock for the contract. We're all on the same page that when we write a spec, we're writing a portion of the construction contract, right? Of course, right. So then if we have alternates, they come along with the bid form. If we have substitutions, we can give instructions as to whether they can happen prior to the bid or after the award or both. And then the technical sections are all addressed as if they're to the contractor that wins the bid. The qualifications are spelled out for fabricators and installers in the technical sections, that is divisions 2 through 49. The performance requirements are spelled out in the specs, just as we all learned how to do them. You can have an open or a closed list. You can use descriptive or standards-based specifications. This is very much whichever CSI practice manual you learned with. It's all right there. But when you go to design, negotiate, build, how is it different? Well, it looks pretty much the same in the quality loop, but there are a few changes to Division 1 and a few possible changes that might happen in the technical sections. The main one that you have to look for in certain subscription masters is, and certain Division 1s provided by clients, is eradicating bidders shall if you have a negotiated contract. The one negotiated contractor is the audience instead of the 5 or 12 potential bidders. Your notice to proceed is likely to be where you start the clock for the contract or the date for the commencement of work, because you don't have a notice of award because you've been negotiating with this contractor for a while. Payment processes might be specially negotiated, and you might even find that you don't have to have a payment processes spec because it's still being wrangled, for one thing, and then it's going to end up in the agreement. So it doesn't necessarily need to be spelled out in a separate specification section. And if you're not privy to it or it's still being wrangled, it's better to just step away. The alternates have to be written differently because they pertain to the GMP or the pricing and not a competitive bid between contractors. So while alternates frequently still happen, they don't have the same effect on the process between the owner and the contractor. Substitutions are proposed by the subs by the one contractor, and so you're not comparing substitutions among different contractors. Only one substitution per discipline is likely. In the text sections, we're still addressing the specs to the contractor. It's possible that our fabricators and installers might also have negotiated subcontracts. For instance, if you want to let a large facade package early in the process, you might well negotiate that early, and we'll talk more about that strategy later. But for the most part, there's no change in how the specs are written, because ultimately they're written for the contractor to engage a sub, and so so performance requirements and products and descriptive or standards-based specs just don't really look all that different when you do it for a negotiated contractor. This is one of our first possible points for you to have typed in your questions. Daniel, do we have any?
No, nothing yet.
Nothing yet. Raise your hands if you've got anything. Hopefully we don't have questions yet because we've all done design, bid, build specs before. All right, well, let's talk about design build. Just to make sure that we're on the same page about design build, there are two different sets of specs. There's the design build RFP, which the owner and the architect prepare to usually the DD stage, and they send out to sometimes called bridging documents, and they send it out to multiple design build entities to bid. And then those design build entities have a second set of specs that are written from the point of view of the design build entity. So the design build, the RFP is written with the design build bidders as the audience, and the big goal is a turnkey facility contract that where the entire building is, or project, is designed to completion and constructed. Designs with bids is what happens next after the specs and the drawings are issued. Then we get down over here and the design build contractor writes completion specs that are written both towards owner validation that yes, we really did write a spec for what you asked for in the RFP, and to let trade subcontracts. So the owner and the owner's executive architect or similar design professional are reviewing the design build specs, and at the same time or shortly afterwards they're being used to award trade subcontracts. So it's kind of got a dual audience, but the but they should obviously say the same thing, because if you say one thing to one person and while you're getting it validated by somebody else, that would be cheating. So let's take a look at how the quality loop changes. Actually, the quality loop is a double loop because we are writing we're writing the specs once, and then we send them down here to the second quality loop in the design build entities specs. So let's zoom in on the RFP specs. We set up our design intent and the function and the performance at a DD level in the requirements, and the design build proposals propose solutions. These solutions get fleshed out, and then we review them, and we need to make sure that we've asked for specific evidence of compliance during our review. So if there's a particular report or preliminary test or compatibility test that we need in order to make sure that the or performance test that we need in order to make sure that we've met the requirements of the design build RFP, then that needs to show up in this substantiation phase. Looks like I got ahead of myself. The proposals should include some basic compliance, then they complete the design, then we review them again. Whoops. Let's just go on to the next slide, shall we? There we go. So once we have this design proposal from the design build contractor, then we have our substantiated construction documents that have been reviewed. Then we have the regular submittal process where the subs offer their specific solutions to the design, and this looks a lot like the quality control quality loop that we used at the design bid build phase. We build it, we test it, make sure that it works. So how then do we manage this as actual specs? In Division 1, during the RFP, many of our normal Division 1 sections just don't apply because we're only at DD and we're asking for a specific set of proposals from the design build entity we're not asking for a complete solution. We're not dictating a complete solution, and that's the first and most important key of specs at RFP, is that we're trying to engage people to finish the design, and so we don't want to tie their hands. So they're competing for the design build contract. We don't need to tell them absolutely everything about Division 1, because they're going to negotiate a contract with the owner after this process. But we are going to talk about what processes are going to be required for the construction documents phase. All of the technical sections are addressed to the design builder, and their whole purpose is to talk about design intent and performance requirements and function, things that the owner really needs. So some sections might look like a complete construction spec, and it's awfully tempting to make them all look like complete construction specs because that's what we know how to write. If the owner's requirements are specific, like we only use Kone EcoSpace elevators, then you can, by golly, go ahead and write a spec section for that. However, most of your sections should be more flexible than design, bid, build, and I would even suggest that it's okay to say things like such as and similar to in the technical sections, because you want to open up things that could have a lot of solutions. You want to open up to those solutions in order to find your most economical way of solving the problem. So if it could be that this panel system that you want is, if what you want is a beige panel system, gosh, there's an awful lot of beige panel systems out there. So you don't need to say that it could be aluminum plate or aluminum MCM or fiber cement or phenolic. You can say all that, or you can say beige panel system complying with the following performance requirements. So if we back up a second, I don't know why that doesn't work. Yeah, if we back up a second, we'll see that where we've gone from here is to go to what the specs look like in the design build contract. So say you win a design build contract and you're writing on behalf of the designer builder, then this is what you need. So the subcontractors, the purpose of those specs is that the subcontractors are responding to the design builder's requests for proposals. Because the owner and the winning design builder are negotiating a contract, Division 1 may vary quite a bit again. You're probably going to write your Division 1 almost as if you're only talking to the subcontractors, because what the owner and the contractor have agreed is in the agreement and is already in force. And so what you're doing is you're pushing those requirements down onto the subcontractors. So while in design bid build we always say that we're not talking to the individual subcontractors, that rule gets broken on purpose in a design build spec written for the design build contract. So because the design builder is free to assign the trades and packages any way that they want, they can specify work results with any method that complies with the RFP. So there may be some great big differences between the individual spec sections that were given to them by there will be big differences between what the RFP spec section said and what the design build spec section says. So going back to that panel concept, if I said beige panel complying with air infiltration requirements and blah, blah, blah. They can't write one of those for their design solution. They have to say, okay, it's aluminum plate and it's gasket sealed and it has extrusions at the edges and it looks like this, and here are where the stiffeners are, and so on and so on. It's going to be a much more specific spec. By the same token, that means that it needs to be an enforceable contract. So we can't use those such as's and similar tos that we found in that RFP spec. We're going to have to eliminate all of that and make it an enforceable spec. So you would not expect that the RFP specs could be reused as the design build specs, and that's a misconception that I've seen in a couple of my design build projects, that that you would expect the specs to look the same. They should not look the same. So here we are with cladding. If I have a volunteer to talk through this with me, you can raise your hand. But I'm going to make Daniel and Ryan do it if
I'm
we
not
don't
seeing
get
a
any
whole lot of hands.
volunteers.
I didn't even see Ryan's hand go up.
Oh man. So let's just say that the design intent is large panels of limestone. What would you expect the design bid build spec to have in it? Say the size of the panels, the kind of limestone.
Yeah, those sound good.
Okay, I think that because you're the architect, I'm gonna ask you, how have you calculated how far apart the anchors have to be? And you're going to say, oh yes, 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 I calculated them because I'm the architect of record. So you'll have your whole backup system drawn or specified or both, and everything from the structure out is in that spec, right? Of course, right. So then in a design build RFP, what would you expect to see?
Well, in the RFP, I think you would see, kind of just the catch-all that, yeah, you want a large limestone panel.
And you might
But
want to say how big is large, but that might be all you need to say.
right.
Are you going to allow honeycomb a backup instead of a full depth stone panel? You can if you want.
No.
Okay.
He doesn't deserve it.
What are you going to allow the panels to be on precast panels?
Could.
You could if you want it.
Yeah, at this stage, it's more ambiguous, I guess. I'm almost looking for an end result as opposed to, a lot of nuts and bolts to, just at the RFP level.
Exactly, exactly. And so if your owner is a purist like Steve Jobs was, then of course not. But then probably Steve Jobs wouldn't be sending this out as a design build RFP. But if your owner is a high-end high-rise housing developer, he might well be happy with cast stone or precast concrete with limestone faces or honeycomb backing or any of those cost-saving possibilities for your limestone panels. So then, assuming the high-rise luxury condo people, the design build construction documents would then hone in on one of these systems. So just for fun, let's say that we are putting the panels on honeycomb backup. So then you would get your spec for the honeycomb system and the jointing and the anchoring and all of the things that are specific to how that attaches to the wall and how it performs. So since we have a couple more of these, yeah, something you wanted to add to that?
No, there was, I think, a question that kind of ties back to this. Uh, typically in the design bid build, you have the quality control at the submittal, and then so the question is, if the designer works for the builder, what mechanism do you specify to maintain the quality control? Because the builder can say, well, we're just looking, back to the RFP. I assumed it was going to be honeycomb, but in the construction documents, it say, it wasn't, because we know that there may be, issues with taking that approach or something. I don't know what the specifics are in this particular question, but I thought it was interesting. Designer works for the builder. How do you maintain that quality control?
That is, that's the big challenge, and that's why you have an executive architect who works for the owner. And that can't be the same architect, in my opinion. It shouldn't be the same architect as the architect working for the builder. You should maintain someone who reviews on behalf of the owner, who isn't hired by the contractor. So in a specific project, I was hired by the architect to write the RFP specs, and then the architect successfully won the contract to review the design build submittals, and so we reviewed the specs that were prepared by the design builders, and they had a separate architect who wrote those specs. And so we were checking to make sure that they were requiring the same performance or better that that we required, and that the system that they proposed was capable of providing that performance. So that's the checks and balances you get when the architect is working for the builder. Does that answer the question in your opinion?
I think it does, yeah.
Does the questioner feel satisfied?
We'll see if the hand goes up.
Okay. All right, sounds good. We have a couple of other examples, and we're going to use this one in a couple other places. So if I were imagining a clear cube with minimal framing for my glass entry, I would probably draw a cube with a glass roof and a glass wall with glass fins to be the primary structure, and some steel beams that support the glass in the important transitions, and little spider fittings, and I would specify all that along with the energy performance and air infiltration and structural requirements for the entry, because I would still want the contractors, and well, this is me, I would never calculate every last piece of glass. I would still make it a delegated design contract, but just for if you were a total purist or you had a really awesome facade consultant, then you could actually get the whole thing specified down to the thickness and the depth of every glass fin. And that would be your design bid build spec. So then if you're doing a design build RFP, you can say, we need a glass box that stands up in these weather conditions, and these seismic conditions and doesn't suck all the energy out of the building. And we can leave it as open, or we can tighten it up a little bit and say that we don't like cable trusses, we prefer glass fins. So then if we turn around, yes?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, the other one I think was a better generic. This one I think you would need some, because there are so many, perceptions of what a glass entry cube could be. So I think you need a little bit better direction, still leaving the latitude in the generic. But like you said, the difference between glass fins to, some sort of structural backing behind it to cable trusses. I mean, all three could give you the same end result, but three very different looks.
True. And it might even be reasonable to say, I really like the Pilkington system, blah, 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 and that that the system should appear similar to that.
Okay.
And then our design build contractor can come back with, well, we looked at the Pilkington system and we propose the Prodema. No, that's the wrong people. I can't remember the name of the local guys in Seattle who do that stuff. But we have this local guy in Seattle who does that stuff, and so we're proposing his system, and it looks like this. And so when they write the spec for that, they write it with their system, that system in mind, and they draw it representing that system. And so if we are the executive architect for the owner, we look at it and we decide whether or not that complies with our requirements. Does that make sense?
Does to me.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
Rather than belabor this more, I think we have the general idea, but it works on all kinds of systems. And so if for instance you need fixed louvers that look like a continuous ribbon at the mechanical penthouse, you would pick the system or pick a basis of design system that works for the design bid build. For the design build RFP, you might do that if you, say, had matching cladding somewhere else that had to match. You might say that the basis of design is this. I guess basis of design is a specific term, but that we based our design on the look of this wall panel and this louver, this fixed louver, and we need this performance. And so they turn around and either write a spec for the louver that we called out or a louver that behaves the same way and looks the same. Okay. So to shift, yeah, it's time to shift anyway. To shift over to these design assist and delegated design elements, sneaking down in here, we have design assist and delegated design, and those are both techniques for shifting just a part of the project to a qualified subcontractor. So these can both be part of a design bid build, a design negotiate build, design build, or IPD project. They have their place in all of those. And the main difference between the design assist and delegated design is that in design assist, the architect of record or the design professional of record remains in charge of the specs, and the trade expert is just informing their work, whereas the delegated design element is passed on completely with a set of performance requirements and design intent passed on completely to the subcontractor for final design. the trade expert, I mean. We just said that. So when you have, and there's two ways to award a design assist subcontract, and they both involve money. There's a third way, but it's not very ethical. We do have certain industries where they're so competitive that people are offering to do design assist without compensation. And to the extent that we can discourage that, we should. So there's my soapbox. Now let's talk about the two ways that are ethical. You can award the subcontract to a qualified subcontractor and pay them as part of that subcontract for design assist services. So they're kind of pre-construction services, but because you've engaged them early, they're a part of the specified agreement. The design professional of record is going to actually draw it, but with the and specify it, but with the input of this trade contractor. So, for instance, the glass box situation, we call upon that local guy in Seattle to join our team early and to help make sure that the performance requirements that we think we're getting are really going to work and that their system is capable of performing to that level. They'll help us pick the system that does, and they'll guide us to its capabilities. And yes, it can go 12 feet, but it can't go 17, so we need to have a beam here. And all of those technical discussions, we have somebody on our side to help us to finish designing the system, and then we finish designing it. We draw it, we specify it, and they've gotten compensated by virtue of the fact that they won the project and that they're going to get to design it, they're going to get to build it according to the contract documents that they helped to create. And then on the other hand, and this happens with entities that aren't allowed to award a non-competitive contract, they sometimes have to have a competitive bid for the package, and so the only way to get design assist is to pay for pre-construction services from one of the qualified subcontractors. Sometimes you don't get as good help that way because they know that they are potentially giving away their trade secrets to a competitor by building in their method of doing something into the specs and the drawings. But if you've paid them, you're more likely to get a decent design, and they're helping you to they should know that they're helping you to write a competitive spec that they can then bid on against other people. So they can't write it so that only they can win it, but they do have an edge still because they are now, you're familiar to the team, and they're the most familiar with the requirements of the project. So they're going to have to put in as much of a vagueness fee, for instance. So they know where the lay of the land is. It's a valid way to set up specs for design assist, but it's a little bit less common and it's a little bit messier, harder to get someone to agree to do it. So I want to back up here. Now we're talking about delegated design, and the goal there is to delegate, to give the design responsibility over to the qualified subcontractor. So the first thing you have to do is set up a way to qualify the subcontractor. So they need to have a um, an engineer who's qualified in the jurisdiction of the project. They don't get paid separately. The cost of the engineering is included in the subcontract. You set up the requirements, the performance requirements, which we'll get to down here in a minute. You have to use the law that applies and the general condition parameters that apply to the project to provide all of the information that the trade contractor is going to need in order to complete the job, complete the design. And in a different presentation, I have exactly what that is, but I don't have it here. Sorry, guys. If you want to ping us afterwards, if you'd like us to follow up on what that information is, I can provide that. So the contract documents have to include the design intent and the performance requirements, and the contractor is entitled to rely on those requirements. That is to say that if you say that it has to stand up in seismic zone C, then they're entitled to rely on that, and if you're in fact in seismic zone D, you have screwed up. So you have to make sure that your performance requirements are valid. The designer for the contractor is going to sign and stamp the delegated design submittal and substantiate that their design conforms to the requirements that were in the contract documents. And then the design professional of record is going to review the submittal to fulfill their duty and their agreement with the owner. You can't just take their word for it, but you can. You are no longer the engineer on that particular item. So say it is a glass handrail. You're entitled to accept a qualified engineer's design for that handrail, but you are still reviewing it for conformance to make sure that they used the right requirements in their calculations and that it complies with your design intent. Yes.
Vivian, I think a question came in on the last part you were talking about. Where do hardware specifiers fit into all this?
Oh dear, hardware specifiers. I would say that most often, effectively, we're delegating the design. And well, no, it depends. Depends upon whether we wrote a general, if we wrote a general set of functions and said let the hardware provider supplier figure it out, and they gave us back a complete schedule, then that's definitely delegating design. But if they wrote it as part of, if they wrote it and we put it in the contract documents, that's design assist. And yes, we get design assist from the manufacturer rep all the time, and we don't call it design assist because we're so used to it. And I would say that that's an area where some architects are interested in reforming their ways and using paid consultants, or only using representatives from the hardware manufacturer if the owner has already standardized on that manufacturer. So it's a bit of a special case. And yes, we routinely accept their help with no compensation, no outright compensation, and that's a topic that we could talk about for way longer than we have.
Okay, yeah, because
that is design assist.
it came with another question. Are there ever signed agreements between hardware specifiers and the architect?
You can request one, and I think all of the hardware consultants who work for manufacturers that I know are willing to set up an agreement and a and a compensation-based commitment if necessary.
Okay, and you got a thank you.
Oh, excellent. So then, what does it look like when we actually write the specs for design assist and delegated design? So we're going to end up with standard spec language with a standard quality loop, except that here in the requirements we're getting advice from our design assist subcontractor. So it's going to look pretty much like it looked before the design assist, only better. But if we are down in the delegated design method, we're setting up criteria that is, whoops, we're setting up criteria that's performance-based, and we're expecting the submittals to have the completed design solution in them. We are reviewing both the qualifications of the person who prepared them and the evidence of compliance, and then they build it. And we still need to have, for systems that are critical, like life safety railings, or like facade elements, we may still have some kind of a field test requirement. I've never seen one for a handrail, but I've seen lots for facades. So the main language that you're going to get in the spec are going to be design requirements, and then the delegated design submittal requirements. So these will appear in part 1, and the design requirements themselves usually appear in part 2. But the other thing that I didn't write down here is the qualifications of the delegated design professional, the engineer, because those may be in Division 1, or they may be in the particular spec section, depending upon how much you rely on delegated design. So here we are back at our glass cube. If we have asked, we kind of talked through what the design assist services would look like with our friends in Seattle, when they helped us to use the system that they can offer. If they were helping us with a bid out situation instead, then we would have paid them a design stipend of some kind, and then we would have asked them to help us write a system that would work for their system, or a Pilkington system, or those guys in the San Francisco Bay Area all could compete on the project. And so they might give us a little bit less information, but they would recommend where to put the horizontal support, the interim horizontal support, and whatever else is going to make the system work no matter whose system it is. But if we specify it as a delegated design subcontract, then we've said what its performance requirements are and what we want it to look like, but then we've stepped back and let them finish drawing it and write the final specs. Or they don't usually turn in final specs. What they turn in is calculations and very detailed shop drawings that are signed by their engineer. And since we have 5 minutes, let's zoom back out. Do we have questions at this stage? Outstanding?
Nope, we stayed on top of it all.
Great, then let's dance through IPD. So when we are writing for an IPD project. Now, then we are speaking for the core team of the IPD contract. So the core team usually consists of the architect, the owner, and the contractor, all working together in a circle in a big room. And if we are the specifier, who may or may not be, and probably isn't, on the IPD team, we are nonetheless speaking for it. And from that perspective, whoops, let's back up just a little. Yeah, whoops, not that much. There. Our task is to award trade contracts. We, the IPD core team, appoint you, the trade contractor, to execute this portion of the work. That's what the spec is for. So it looks a lot like a major contract let early, like a facade package, but they can be as big or as small. It looks also a lot like a multi-contractor project. So the core team sets up the requirements and writes construction documents that, according to their consultant's direction, the trade contractors, or subcontractors, propose their solutions. We review their proposals for evidence of compliance, and then they build it, and we do all of the usual quality control testing. So the goal is to assign and direct each trade. So a lot of Division 1 isn't going to apply because the IPD contract is, excuse me, there we go, is within the core team. I don't mean to make you guys dizzy, sorry. Each of the subcontractors responds to these requests for proposals or bids, but the Division 1 is already agreed, and so what we write in Division 1 is likely to be similar to what we wrote for a design build contract, where that entity is talking to the trades directly about what they have to do to play nice with all the other trades and to substantiate their work to the team. The core team is free to assign trades and packages the same way that the design builds entity is free to assign the trades and packages however they want. Actually, a side note, this means that that other rule about how the specs don't assign, how the specs are divided up does not mean that the packages are divided up the same way. That rule doesn't apply to either IPD or design build. You're free to write a spec section that actually represents the contract for the subcontractor's work. And then the core team can specifies work results using any method that complies with the team's goals and values. That means that you can issue some of the work results as delegated design packages. You can issue some of, this might be a really good use of design assist, where you bring in your design assist subcontractor to the core team and have a charrette, and then the core team finishes the documents. That can be a really good use of the collaborative environment. Or you can, by golly, say that you want the Kone Echo Space elevator in 3,500 pound capacity. You can say exactly what you want, whatever it is that works for the project. And now we have no minutes left, unless you have questions.
We didn't get any last minute questions in, but I definitely do appreciate the presentation. Very informative.
Thank you.
We
I
got
appreciate the chance to try it out. Pardon?
I said, and we got a bravo at the end.
Ooh, fabulous. Thank you.
And once again, if you need AIA credits when we end the webinar in about 30 seconds, please fill out the survey. If you don't get the survey, you will get a reminder email, I believe later today or first thing tomorrow morning. If you filled it out at the end of this, you don't need to fill out that email that you receive, and we'll make sure you get either your certificates or your AIA credit. And once again, appreciate everyone attending, and thank you, Vivian, for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, all.
Bye-bye.